All right, Mr. Martin, it looks like we're ready here in the room, but I will make one comment. We have about 34 people online, so if you are not speaking, please mute your mic. If you are on the Zoom conference, not on your telephone, there should be a button in the control panel that says mute. Please mute it when you're not speaking, and then unmute yourself anytime you need to make a comment. If you are joining us by the phone, it is the *6 key will toggle mute and unmute. So please keep yourself muted until you speak and then unmute yourself. If you find yourself speaking and nobody hearing, it's probably because I muted you because there was distracting background noise. So know that you hit your own mute button on the Zoom call or *6 to be able to speak again if I happen to mute you. Anybody have any questions to that? All right, Mr. Martin, I will turn it over to you. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. It is 10:29 a.m. on January 19th, and I'm calling to order the County Development Committee of that date. Would you please call the roll?
For attendance, Mr. Martin?
Present.
Brown?
Brown present.
Berman?
Berman here.
Ford?
Ford here.
Iqbal?
Iqbal present.
Kenyon?
Kenyon here.
Wonicky?
Wonicky present.
Fraz?
Here.
Caius?
Vice President.
Thank you.
Pepro, ex officio, Vice Chairman present.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a quorum. The next matter before us is the approval of minutes from December 15th. May I have a motion, please, for approval?
Ford moves.
Wonicky moves.
Mr. Ford moves. Ms. Wonicky seconds. Do we have comments or questions or suggested changes? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Okay, so this is for approval of the minutes. Berman?
Correct.
Mr. Berman?
Berman, yes.
Ford?
Ford, yes.
Iqbal?
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon?
Yes.
Wonicky?
Yes.
I think you forgot Pat Brown.
Mr. Brown?
Brown, yes.
Thank you.
Forgot Fraz, I think.
Mr. Fraz will only be voting in case of a tie.
Oh, okay.
Motion carries. The minutes stand approved. We have the monthly financial report attached. Do we have anyone from the finance department who wants to address the committee this morning? Hearing no comment, we will move to public comment. I've been given notice of no one. Do we have anyone intending to speak today?
Mr. Martin, I think I had a couple potential ones here. Hold on a second. Let me, some folks from Anderson Animal Shelter and Deanne Orlick.
Are the people from Anderson on the phone?
Yes.
Did you intend to make a presentation, or would you like to address issues should they arise from the committee?
We will defer to just address questions if they arise from the committee.
All right, thank you very much. Then those being the only potential comments, I move forth now to the Building and Zoning Division. First, the monthly report, Mr. Van Kerkhoff.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to report our team is continuing to work remotely very effectively and efficiently.
Trying to get hold of Andrew. I did.
You able to hear me okay?
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
And so we're continuing to work on receiving building permit applications online, doing our plan reviews using PDF and electronic plan review. And our building inspectors are still following up on field inspections on construction sites, as well as follow up on complaints and violations. We had our administrative adjudication hearing remotely last week, so we can continue to follow up on working with non-compliant properties to bring them into compliance. So with that, if there's any questions about our activities, I'd be happy to answer those at this time. Otherwise, we can move on to the zoning petitions.
Are there any questions of Mr. Van Kerkhoff? Hearing none, please move to the petitions.
Thank you. We have 3 petitions for you this morning. The first one is petition 4566 in Aurora Township. The PowerPoint presentation is also in your packet. Blair, I don't know if you just want to forward the agenda packet to those slides and forward those for me, that would be fine. Here's a location map from the petition. If you can go to the next slide. Here's a summary of the petition. Here's its it's the rezoning from F district farming to B3 with a special use for trucking. This is way down on County Line Road. You can see the Fox River a little bit to the right. It's an area that's planned for potential mixed use, could be residential, could be business uses. It's surrounded by the village of Montgomery. If you can go to the zoning map next. And just scroll down. There you go. There's our zoning map. You can see this is an infill piece. It is surrounded by the village of Montgomery. They have been very involved in their review process. They did not elect to try to get this property owner to annex into the village and have been supportive and part of the process for this proposed rezoning. I can go to the next slide. Here you see an aerial. It is an adjacent to an industrial park. The site will be accessed from the east along the road that's in the village of Montgomery. You can see to the south, there's some residential properties, including on this parcel. Some of that will remain residential. And then there's vacant land to the west and then some other residential properties. If you can go to the next slide, please. Here's just another close-up showing the proposed area is basically the northern parcel would be the B3 to allow the truck terminal, outdoor parking of trucks, and the area that's kind of in between the residential to the south, and where you see the truck parking is the detention area. If you can go to the next slide, please. Here's the site plan. North is to your right, so it could fit on the screen, here it is showing the easements and things have been negotiated working with Water Resources and with the village of Montgomery. But next slide, please. Here it is again with the parking plan and the detention shown for the site. Next slide, please. Staff recommendation stipulations from KDOT that there be no access to Route 30. All right-of-way concerns are coordinated with the village of Montgomery. Those have been satisfied. Next slide, please. Regional Planning Commission was not applicable. Zoning Board of Appeals recommends approval with the recommended stipulations, and it's before you this morning.
Thank you. May we please have a motion for approval?
Brown moves.
Ford seconds.
Thank you. Do we have comments or questions regarding this petition? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll? Oh, excuse me, was there a comment?
Berman.
Yes, Mr. Berman.
Is this contiguous to Montgomery?
Yes, it is. It's contiguous to Montgomery. They have the industrial park that's immediately to the east, as well as the road that the site will be accessed from.
And they're not annexing to Montgomery?
They are not. Part of our policy is to, when these types of proposals come in, is we direct them to the municipality and encourage annexation if the municipality wishes it. And in this case, the village of Montgomery did not wish to annex this parcel.
Interesting.
I have a question, if I may. It's Corinne.
Please.
Where is the access point that they come, the trucks are driving into the parking lot and exiting from, if not onto 30?
Sure, they'll be coming from the road to the east. There's an industrial park immediately to the east, and you can see a road that's about in the middle of the screen coming from the east, about into the middle of the parking for the proposed site. Yeah, thank you. Right along there.
Bates, please.
Ms. Bates?
What is the use right now? It looks like trucks parked.
Yes, they proceeded with construction of the lot and use of the land prior to obtaining the zoning, so they technically were in violation to start. So they are now finally completing their zoning. Some of the delay in the zoning had to do with the prolonged negotiations and discussions with the Village of Montgomery.
Is there any concern about the additional truck traffic? Does anybody express a concern about that?
No, there has not been a direct expressed concern. The roadway partly visible just to the north is US Route 30. So the trucks would be exiting to the east through that industrial park. And then there's a road that directs directly onto Route 30 to the north. And you can see the other land uses accessing that same road, and Route 2, Route 30 are also pretty heavily intense on truck traffic.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Brown, yes.
Ford,
Ford, yes.
Igbal. Mr. Igbal? Kenyon?
Kenyon, yes.
Woniki?
Woniki, yes.
Iqbal, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Igbal. Yes, and thank you, Ms. Woniki. Passes.
Motion carries.
No, yes, yeah.
We now have petition 4567.
Thank you. If you can advance the slides. One more, please. A couple more. Thank you. This is petition number 4567 with a trust number. This is for actually for the Anderson Animal Shelter, proposed zoning F district farming to PUD planned unit development for use as an animal shelter, veterinary clinic, horse rescue, and wildlife rescue, as well as with agriculture and some of the property. Advance the slide, please. Here you can see on the county's 2040 future land use map, it is in an area planned for agriculture. You see there's a subdivision to the north, forest preserve to the northwest and northeast. Immediately to the east is a property that was annexed to the village of Campton Hills. And you can see the other sort of residential and farming uses in the area. Next slide, please. Here's the zoning map. Again, you can see the area striped in red. To the north and east is the village of Campton Hills, and you can see a little bit of Elburn in the lower left corner. Otherwise, it's predominantly surrounded by areas zoned F district farming with a few F1 uses. There's a special use immediately to the west for a nursery greenhouse business. You go to the next slide, please. Here's an aerial, and you can see again most of the area, the subject property and the parcels surrounding are being used for agriculture. Next slide, please. Here's a close-up. You can see there is one existing building in the north west corner. Next slide, please. Here's the site plan. We'll do a zoom close-up on the next slide, but you can see most everything in the southern part of the parcel will still be pastures or remain in agriculture. And most of the construction on the site, the proposed shelter and rescue buildings and parking are all mostly internal. So a lot of the agricultural feel and open space along this corridor will remain intact. If you go to the next slide, please. Here's more of a detail. In the buildings are shaded in gray. The northernmost central building will be the main adoption center and shelter and community room uses for training. There'll also be proposed horse rescue center and paddocks towards the west, and then a small wildlife rescue facility sort of in the southeast. Otherwise, you can see some walking trails, fenced-in areas for paddocks and detention. Next slide, please. This is a list of the uses being proposed in the Adoption Resource Center, horse rescue, and wildlife rescue. I will mention that the PUD zoning category is used as a way to super customize both the uses that are being approved for the property and the site plan. So the site plan that I just went over that was submitted is the PUD development plan, and this list of uses for those buildings become the zoning specifically. So any changes to those, if this were to be approved and developed, would need to go through either rezoning process or a minor adjustment process. But this in fact then becomes the zoning and the uses that are permitted on this property. Next slide, please. Here's just a couple more that we're listing in terms of hours and parking for the wildlife rescue center. So it's a sort of a continuation of the last slide. Next slide, please. Staff recommended stipulations, mostly from Water Resources Department. I won't, you can see them. Jody Welnick's on the call if there's any questions. Next slide, please. There's some stipulations from KDOT regarding the access to Route 38, construction of an eastbound turn lane and westbound turn lane, an impact study. Those would be need to be satisfied before the issuance of any permits for construction on the site. Next slide, please. Regional Planning Commission was not applicable. I will note that there is reference in the ordinance for PUD's developments to go to the Regional Planning Commission. Those are for projects like the Mill Creek PUD or large subdivision developments. One of our zoning board members did note that discrepancy, and we are going to work with the state's attorney's office on revising some language to make the path for approval more clear in the future if it's only zoning that is being requested by the applicant. Zoning Board of Appeals, noting that question, did recommend approval with the recommended stipulations. And it's before you this morning. I believe someone from Anderson, representing Anderson Shelter, is on the Zoom call as well. And either of us can answer any questions.
Thank you. May we have a motion, please?
Mike
I'll
Kenyon
move it.
moves.
Wonecki moves.
Ms. Wonecki
Wonecki
moves. Mr.
second. Mhm.
I'm sorry, who moved?
Kenyon.
Kenyon moves. Ms.
Wonecki will
Wonecki.
second, yeah.
Now, may we have comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman, Wonecki here.
Yes, ma'am.
This is in my district, and I had spoken with a member from Anderson Animal Shelter just the other day, and there were some concerns that they were possibly going to apply for a liquor license. But in speaking with the director of Anderson Animal Shelter, they are absolutely not applying for a liquor license. They may apply for like a special event permit if they were having possibly a fundraiser on the property. I just wanted to add that I'm actually looking forward to Anderson joining us in Campton Township, along with Fox Valley Wildlife. I think it'll be a great addition to our community and a future family destination. So I certainly will support this petition.
Thank you. Do we have other comments or questions?
Fraz has a comment.
Mr. Fraz.
Yeah, I'd just like to mention also my district is directly to the south of their property line, and Anderson's been a pleasure to work with. Their representative has been in contact with Ms. Wonecki and myself several times over several months. And they were very open and inclusive with us as to exactly what they wanted to do from the very start, asked our advice. It worked out very well. I did contact a couple of neighbors out in the area that I know that are very active in issues in the area, and they were both completely supportive, and I believe they attended the ZBA meeting. It does fit the character of the neighborhood, which is essentially, this is essentially like a farm. And I know the village of Elburn has always supported, farming type open space green uses to the east of their planning area. They're very interested in having distinction between the communities. So this really fits everything that we're trying to do out in the area there. And I support it wholeheartedly.
Thank you. Any other, excuse me, was that you, Mr. Berman?
Yes. What's the acreage of this?
Mark, what?
121 acres.
121 acres? Okay.
Any other comments or questions?
Mr. Martin, this is Chairman Pirog. Just curious, this looks like a wonderful family venue. And I'm wondering if there's going to be transportation, pedestrian crossways, walking paths to this area so that if families or children on bicycles may like to come visit the animals, they're going to have safe access to this venue?
Perhaps either Mr. Van Kerkhoff or the developer's representative would like to address that question.
So it's mostly set up as a destination with all the things you mentioned once you're in on the property. So I don't know if that answers your questions, because I don't think we have pedestrian infrastructure along Route 38 that can connect into our campus. But the idea is that it is a campus that's focused on a park-like, accessible outdoor experience, as well as the animal rescue experience. So does that answer your question or not?
What I'm hearing is that no, there is no pathway along the road for walking or bicycling. So just to consider going forward, if we get some grant money, that may be something we want to look at, perhaps coming from the village of Elburn or Campton Hills. Thank you.
Yeah, and we do have a path that's in proximity that could be connected to 38. So if there was path infrastructure, regional bike path, we would absolutely want it to be connected into it. I think that would fit within the mission of what the development is all about.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman, Shepro.
Mr. Shepro.
Yeah, just a question. Wouldn't any sort of pathway that involved Route 38 require a review by the state as well?
Sure.
I can take that, Mr. Chairman. Fraz can take that.
Mr. Fraz?
Yeah, anything to do with Route 38 would require a IDOT permit. I'm not really sure that we would even encourage foot traffic across Route 38. I know Elburn has a very long-term plan to have a circular bike path around the entire community. And if and when that happens, this would be a real easy hook up to that point. But, as far as the path question, there's just nothing to hook onto at this point. But if something does evolve, it would be a very easy process to hook up to it from the property, because it's so large and it fronts on two different east and south, or east and north. So it wouldn't be hard to do.
Thank you. Anything else? Hearing no further comments or questions, would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Brown, yes.
Ford,
Ford, yes.
Iqbal, Kenyon, Wonicky,
Wonicky, yes.
Mr. Kenyon,
Yes.
Mr. Iqbal. Take care, 5.
The motion carries. This is, Anderson is one of the county's great success stories, and I'm sure we're all pleased that it's moving ahead. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Next, we have petition 4568.
Thank you. Thank you for advancing. One more slide, please. This is 4568. Applicant is the King County Forest Preserve District, rezoning from F District Farming to F1 Rural Residential to allow an existing home to be sold off from the remaining property. Next slide, please. Here you see it on the 2040 land use map. It is in an area for proposed open space. The area surrounding the farmstead is our subject site is being purchased by the King County Forest Preserve District. This would allow the existing home and improvements to be sold off separately. Next slide, please. Here it is on the zoning map. You can see the village of Elburn in the red striped area to the west. This parcel is zoned F District Farming, again surrounded by mostly F District Farming and Forest Preserve and a couple other residential use zonings to the east. Next slide, please. Here you see it on the aerial. You can see this definitely, it's an existing site, but within the areas that have been developed by their large residential estate uses or the King County Forest Preserve District purchases. Next slide, please. Here you see a close-up. The proposed split off of this parcel for rezoning pretty much hugs the area that was developed for the residential use, the house and outbuilding, and the pond. Next slide, please. Here you see an exhibit with the area carved out for the residential use. Next slide, please. Here's a survey indicating the access along the existing driveway and the existing buildings and location of the pond along with the legal description. Next slide, please. Regional Planning Commission, this was not applicable. Zoning Board of Appeals recommends approval and it's before you this morning.
Thank you. May we have a motion, please?
Kenyon moves.
Brown
Ford seconds.
Mr. Kenyon moves, Mr. Ford seconds. Do we have comments or questions? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Brown, yes.
Ford,
Ford, yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Kenyon, yes.
Wonicky.
Wonicky, yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. The next two items, if I could offer a little introduction. Dr. Iqbal requested that this be put on the agenda as far back as last November, and at my request agreed that we would delay it simply so that we weren't confronting the brand new board with a vote on cannabis legalization in the county without having some chance to educate themselves towards that process. Along that same light, I have requested Mr. Van Kerkhoff to make a presentation today so that the people voting this time around on this issue can see basically the same materials that the prior board saw as it reviewed this matter a year ago. And I will add to it, well, I have another point to make, but I'll make that at a point in time when we're at discussion. So Mr. Van Kerkhoff, I'm turning it over to you now for the presentation. Mark?
Thank you. I just wanted to know this was also done with a lot of assistance from our Assistant State's Attorney, Aaron Brady, who is also on the call and available for questions as we go through the material. Next slide, please. So in 2019, the county board was faced with a number of decisions regarding adult use cannabis businesses. One of those decisions was all local governments in Illinois had the opportunity to either allow or prohibit with the state act called Adult Use Cannabis Businesses. This is taken from a slide that was used for presentations back then. The basic question, should the county board allow adult use cannabis businesses in the unincorporated area of Kane County? At that time, the vote was no, or opt out for now. The no vote was with the understanding that it could be revisited in the future. Our zoning ordinance was amended to add the definitions and language that prohibits those specific businesses in the unincorporated area. And that was adopted on November 12 of 2019. Next slide, please. This proposed new ordinance would rescind that ordinance that was passed on November 12th of 2019. If it is rescinded, would need to work with the Zoning Board of Appeals and staff to amend the zoning ordinance that would reflect how and where those businesses would be permitted. The ordinance includes language that says that those would need to be done in the next 90 days after adoption of this ordinance, if adopted. So we'd have 90 days to work on drafting text amendments, having those go through the public review process, the zoning board process, and then back through the committee process. The state act does allow local governments to enact what they call reasonable zoning regulations pertaining to the businesses. Next slide, please. I included these just for your information because the state act does have a definition for adult use cannabis business establishment. That actually is an umbrella definition, and then there are 6 sub types of businesses that are under that. I'm including those because the state act states that if a local government like a county allows these businesses, it has to be all of them. We can't pick and choose which businesses we would like to allow and not allow. So it's kind of an all or nothing approach to adult use cannabis businesses. So I'll run through these quickly, and if there's any questions, you can let me know. But one of the type of uses is a craft grower. That'd be someone who does sort of craft growing for specialized products. A cultivation center basically is what it sounds like. It would be for actually growing the cannabis for the adult use businesses. Next slide, please. Dispensing organization, that's probably the one that's received the most attention. Those are our dispensaries, the point of sale locations like the one that's in the village in North Aurora. And then the other type of use is an infuser organization. That's a business that would actually infuse or place the product into other products such as edibles. If you could move on to the next slide, please. Processing or processor, that's someone who actually would be processing the plants into the cannabis concentrate. And then the final one is the cannabis transportation organization or a transporter. Next slide, please. So those are the types of businesses covered under the act. If they were, the county board were allow those businesses, those would be the ones we would need to deal with. I'm just going to list a couple possible approaches to zoning regulations. Those were covered back in 2019, just to give you an idea if the county did allow these businesses, what kind of zoning regulations the county board could consider. For one, staff would recommend that we go ahead and review and confirm all the definitions and everything that was adopted back in 2019 by the state, just to make sure there weren't any amendments or changes or interpretations. We'd review and amend other definitions in our ordinance. We would add the various types of adult use cannabis businesses. Staff's recommendation would be what a lot of other communities have done, is allow these businesses as a special use in certain zoning districts as a way to be able to, in a sense, have the county board vote and approve and have the public give input on every location that's proposed. Next slide, please. So this is just a chart as an example of what we would do. We would define specific, those businesses are on the left-hand column. The different zoning districts that they might be appropriate in are on the right, the top column. And then the chart just shows, where that might happen. So for example, a dispenser business would be a special use in one of our business districts. And again, this is just an example to give you an idea how staff would recommend the zoning ordinance approach all these different businesses in conjunction with their zoning districts. Next slide, please. Other things that we could add to the ordinance, the state has included, and they've adapted setbacks from property lines of other uses like schools, residential care facilities, other sensitive land uses. We can add hours of operations. We can consider limiting some types of businesses to some certain zones of the county. That was one approach that was discussed back in 2019. And then we could also consider limiting the number of cannabis businesses that could be approved, kind of like the county does with liquor licenses. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea of what our other Collier counties are doing, here's a list of the other Cook and suburban counties. Currently, DuPage County is the only other county along with Lake that prohibits businesses. Lake County, their one-year prohibition stated to have them reevaluated in February. So I'll be going through a similar process. Otherwise, the other surrounding counties, including DeKalb County to the west, all allow them, mostly as special uses. Next slide, please. So again, this would rescind the other ordinance. Text amendments would need to be proposed and adopted. I gave you some examples of what those might look like. Development committee action today would be a motion to approve this ordinance to rescind the cannabis businesses. And happy to answer any questions, as well as State's Attorney Aaron Brady. Thank you.
I think it's appropriate that we have the motion and then let's have a discussion. So can someone move to approve, please?
Iqbal moves.
Do we have a second?
Kenyon will second it.
Kenyon seconds. Now for discussion. I believe Mr. Fries, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question and then a couple of comments. My question for Mark, so just to make sure everybody's on the same page, this is just in the unincorporated areas. So if we vote no or yes, whatever, it only affects the areas outside the municipalities?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so that clarified. I know in my district, this was something that came up in the last election, and it was very clear to me from talking to people that in my district, West Central Kane County, that they do not support this and don't want it. I'm also wondering if Sheriff Hain is on the line or a representative from the Sheriff's Office.
Drew, I can address that. I spoke at some length with Sheriff Hain over the last 2 or 3 days, and and this is a summary of the conversation, but he said he had requested that this be delayed for purposes of his office's observation of what potential problems would exist in the facilities that are allowed. And his statement to me was that they've observed no problems and that at this point in time, he would not contest or ask that the prohibition be continued based upon enforcement concerns.
Okay, that was my question, because he was very, when this first came up and we denied it, there was a great concern about that, and apparently they've changed their position. So just want to be clear on that. But as far as me personally representing District 18, I'm against this.
Berman, like to speak.
Mr. Berman?
Yes, I guess I'm probably most knowledgeable about cannabis in the county, because North Aurora approved medical marijuana in the beginning. And of course, we approved recreational marijuana before last year, and that started January of 2020. I think on my board, and the decision was, first of all, for medical marijuana to be sold, is that it was just another certified regulated drug that could be available for people to use for medical reasons. And I think when the recreational came along, we had no problem or anything with medicinal. And so our attitude towards recreational was that it was going to be approved someplace. And we would rather have control of it in our own community rather than the neighbor next door. And so I think that we approved it. Well, the vote was not 6-0. So there is always an opposition, but it's turned out to be a good profit maker for the village. It also, we had difficulty the first month with parking and utilization of the facility, but since then it's worked out well. As a matter of fact, the village just approved the expansion of the unit. We also we have a recommendation or a request for a growing facility also. So I think that the experience in North Aurora has been that it has not been a detriment to our community. Our police department has said that we have not had an increase in arrests for driving under the influence of marijuana. So I think there are many positives that we've seen from the standpoint. And obviously there's always the moral issue that someone has that, it's not right. But there are more people using marijuana for medical reasons, or especially now during the COVID, that for their relaxation, their ability to use it to sleep. And we're not talking about just smoking marijuana, but we're also talking about the other opportunities for utilization of it. So I speak in favor of it. I think that the county would be smart in taking advantage of someone who wants to enter into that in the county area.
Thank you. Further comments?
Mr. Chairman, Shepro?
Mr. Shepro?
Yes, I'm opposed to this, and the reason I'm opposed to it is for a reason that I don't think I've heard discussed. The county's adopted 3 times a comprehensive land use plan, the 2020 plan, the 2030 plan, and the 2040 plan. And I've been proud of the fact that I was a member of the Regional Plan Commission for each of those 3 adoptions, and even more proud of the fact that the county has consistently defended and enforced that plan and worked hard to get our municipal partners in the county to buy into the philosophy behind it. And one of the strongest policies that is in our plan is that the county has a policy that it does not compete with municipalities for commercial development. As far as I know, that has been a consistent policy since the plan was first adopted. And it seems to me that aside from all the other arguments that have been made, as Mr. Berman points out, North Aurora, as well as other municipalities in the county, have invested time, encouraged businesses to locate within their community. And it seems to me that for the county now to start allowing businesses to compete with these existing businesses is a direct contradiction of a very strong policy in our land use plan. So I think that alone should be a basis for us at a minimum to go slow. And as I say, at this point, I would be inclined to oppose anything that would contradict our existing land use plan.
Thank you. Further comments?
Ford.
Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I go along with the talk about the land use plan, that we need to revisit that. That's one of mine. 2 is I would like to see something that tells us how are the funds being distributed. Where does this go into a general fund? Are we using it for other parts of our budget? Also, I have a concern with, I want to see our cities do well, So when the cities of Kane County do well, then Kane County does well. I do have a slight concern about being competitive with the municipalities. I think that's something we got to look at. I would like to kind of like refer this for 30 days to do some more research, to talk to some of the mayor of Aurora and others at Montgomery, and see what is the response are, and even with North Aurora, to see what their response would be to the county getting involved in this part of it.
Thank you. Further comment?
Sanchez here.
Mr. Sanchez?
Thank you, Mr. Martin. I think the idea of competition with municipalities is perhaps, the argument is perhaps a little thin, simply because our unincorporated areas, there aren't going to be many of them where a dispensary seems like a good fit. We do have some, bars in unincorporated areas. I don't know that anyone's going to want to put a dispensary in unincorporated Kane County anywhere. I think really what we're going to be seeing applications for is the growers, the infusers, all of the operations that really aren't public facing. That's stuff that happens behind the scenes. They send their product off to the dispensary. So I don't really feel that there's going to be much competition. I don't know that really is a grave concern. Our reasoning originally for adopting the ordinance we did was the safety concerns, which we see now are not as much of a concern as we believed. Sheriff Hain has changed his position, and the numbers just show that cannabis legalization in Illinois did not increase crime in any significant way. So I think that is the main concern we had before. But as far as competition with municipalities goes, I just don't see there being much of that at all. Really, I think this will be a benefit.
Thank you. If I can add to Mr. Sanchez's point, I had two concerns when I voted against this the first time. The one being adopting the sheriff's concerns about what we would have as enforcement issues. And the second one was not knowing what our surrounding counties were doing. I was concerned that we could have a dispensary in the middle of nowhere just because it could cater to DeKalb County, for example. That since inasmuch as DeKalb County now permits it, and I think virtually all of our surrounding counties, with the exception of DuPage, permits it, and DuPage is totally serviced, should that be an issue, by all of the communities on the Fox River who are legalizing it. So I agree with Mr. Sanchez to the extent that I think that what we're really talking about here are non-retail activities, and I'm going to guess few of those, because one of the mandates of these facilities is very commonly that they have demands for electricity that can be met by municipalities and that may not be available to them in the unincorporated area. So I don't have a lot of passion here, but I do believe that the concerns, at least that were my basis for voting no last time, have not matured or do not exist in a degree sufficient that I would vote against this again.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Shepro.
Yeah, in response to what the chair and Mr. Sanchez said, I would agree that growing would be an example of something that I don't think is going to be directly competitive. But if there is a belief that we want to allow, I think you referred to it as non-retail a few moments ago, I would suggest that then we should make that explicit. And if there is a belief that we should revisit the original ordinance, I would support a revision that would allow non-retail uses if we are allowed to make that distinction. Because I think that the competition of a dispensary, and it may well be that nobody wants to put one out here, but I still think that should be something that the plan says we don't support that, whatever kind of business it is. And this is I think this is not the same thing as a bar. Anyway, that's my comment.
Let me suggest and then see if there's kind of a consensus that I'm either right or wrong. But what we're talking about today, should we vote in favor of this ordinance, would be enabling and instructing our staff to put together recommended zoning changes and issues such as you raised, Mr. Shepro, concerning the restriction of retail activities or that type of thing, at least in my mind, could be properly discussed in the context of our review of those zoning changes as proposed by the Zoning Board of Appeals. And are people in agreement with that or not? Just so that we have a clarity in how we proceed.
Could you have could we put the ordinance back up on the screen? I don't have a printed copy in front of me.
Mr. Chairman, in the meantime, I could address Mr. Shepro's question. My understanding from the original act and the decision made in 2019, and I don't believe that it's changed, is that it is an all or nothing. That if the county board elects to allow adult use cannabis businesses, it needs to be all of those establishments, including the dispensaries. So I don't think we can eliminate, pick and choose which types of businesses we want if the county board decides to allow them. And maybe State's Attorney Brady can comment on that.
That's my understanding as well, but it's been a while since we've looked at it from that perspective, so I can certainly go back and check.
Mr. Chairman, Brown here. I got a question.
Mr. Brown.
I'm just, Mark, maybe you could answer this. I'm assuming that we're just revisiting this ordinance because it's been a year. There's nobody standing in line waiting to do one of these facilities.
Yeah, we have not been approached by anyone with an application or indication that they have a site that they're looking at. So this is strictly a revisiting of that decision made in 2019, put forth by Mr. Iqbal.
Thank you.
I have a question for the state's attorney, perhaps.
Mr. Shepro?
Yeah, why is it necessary to rescind the ordinance in order for somebody to draft a proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance?
So when the act passed back in 2019, had language that, excuse me, I'm sorry, I just got a phone call. It had language that said counties were automatically opting in and were allowing sales and cannabis business establishments in unincorporated areas unless they specifically passed an opt-out ordinance. And so that is what Kane County did in the fall of 2019. So the reason for the drafting language as it is here is to make a clear path, with a codifier and anybody else in the future who comes back to look at what was done, to make it a clean path that that opt-out ordinance was actually rescinded.
I would be concerned that if we rescind the opt-out ordinance, we have then effectively opted in because there's no ordinance replacing it. We're in the same position if we rescind this than if we had never adopted it in the first place. And I think you would have a very strong argument that that we have now made a decision to opt in effect. And I don't see why the staff could not draft and propose and hold hearings on a proposed opt-in ordinance without rescinding this one until we're ready to vote.
I understand the way this ordinance is drafted is that it affects 90 from the date that it's passed by the county board to effectively allow for time where there isn't a gap between opting in and opting out, or other way around?
Well, the gap, you create a 90-day gap by rescinding the ordinance today. If this ordinance stays in effect, there is no gap. You could amend, rescind, and amend at the same meeting with no gap.
You could. You know, we were asked to provide some guidance and help, and that's what we did. If you feel done a different way, you know, that motion can always be made, but I think this is the best way to inform the committees and the zoning board about what the guidance is going to be from the county board, so that they can begin making those text amendments, which are going to take.
I have a question. If we in fact adopted Mr. Shepro's suggestion, could we in fact, having done that, could we still empower the Zoning Board of Appeals and the staff to make those recommendations? Zoning Board of Appeals, I'm more concerned about than the staff. But would they be empowered to provide that review?
You mean striking the language that repeals the prior ordinance?
Yes.
And still, yes, you can do that. So somebody's just going to have to make it clear in the next ordinance that gets passed with the zoning amendments or otherwise that there is explicit rescission of that opt-out ordinance by another ordinance.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Van Kerkhoff.
I think from a staff standpoint, and that we're looking for guidance, policy guidance from the county board, if they would like to allow adult use cannabis businesses before investing the time, staff time to research other ordinances and make recommendations to the zoning board, have the zoning board go through the review process and publication and public hearing process. You know, we'd prefer to have a clear direction from the county board that this is the direction that they want to go prior to doing that work, and avoid confusion if the zoning board were to go through all that and propose allowing, you know, ordinances, and then if the county board came to the same conclusion that they wanted to continue to prohibit them, that would be, you know, a lot of time and effort on behalf of the zoning ordinance and perhaps confusing to the public.
I guess I have a question to follow up on that. Earlier in this meeting, the development committee has passed on a number of development proposals that involve amendments to the existing zoning ordinance. I don't hear anybody saying, let's rescind the existing ordinance while we go through and propose a new zoning change. I just have never heard of that being done ever. And I don't know why, you know, in effect, we're taking the final vote. I don't know how you reinstate the ordinance if the direction of the county board is that they don't want to proceed with this after they've seen what the amendment is. I think the whole point of having public hearings before the Zoning Board of Appeals would be designed to address any public concerns or board concerns and have a full vetting of it before there is action taken to rescind an existing zoning ordinance.
Mr. Chairman, can I respond, please?
Yes.
This is Erin
please.
Brady. Mr. Shepro, again, that motion could be made. I'm just trying to, by drafting it this way, keep housekeeping measures in place so that things don't get lost amid the shuffle. This is a little bit different than the zoning petitions because we do have a state law in effect that required that opt-out ordinance be passed. And so I wanted for you know, anybody that's involved in this project to keep in mind that there are mechanical things that need to be done if the board does decide to opt in. And
that
again,
would be true of any text amendment.
Right, but this is particular to a state law that regulates the administration and sale of the tax and the program. Again, if it's the will of the committee or the board to remove that language, as I indicated to Chair Martin, that's certainly something that can be done and amended today. I would just recommend that for the final ordinance, if it eventually passes the county board with DBH changes, that language be explicitly included in whatever final ordinance that may be.
I mean, that, if that in the final ordinance, you would simply have a section that says, ordinance, whatever the ordinance number is, the ordinance so-and-so is hereby repealed, correct?
That's right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, who's speaking?
And this is Mark Van Kerkhoff.
Oh, yes.
I would just like to let the committee know, well, this was the approach to get the policy level discussion going, that if the development committee or the board as a whole would prefer to see a draft of what the zoning ordinance amendments would be for allowing those uses in the different districts, we are happy to go ahead and do that. We just didn't want to do that without any direction. But if that's an important part of the decision for county board members on whether to rescind the prohibition that they want to see those zoning ordinance amendments, proposed amendments first, we'd be happy to do that.
Chairman Martin, this is Chairman Pirog. I have a comment, if I may. I'd like to respond to the question by Board Member Ford regarding how the money, the tax money is to be used. And perhaps State's Attorney Aaron could help us with this. I believe that the tax money is to be used, received from any cannabis sales or B2B tax, business-to-business tax, would be used directly for our public safety programs. I believe that's where it's designated. I think that's an excellent use for that to help with addiction programs and related activities with that. The other thing I would like to have the committee consider is that we are right now in a time of high unemployment, as we know, and due to the economic duress caused by COVID-19. And this opportunity for these businesses to be developed, and I'm not just talking about dispensaries, I'm talking about grow centers as well as the craft growers and infusers, transportation, provide high-paying jobs. The Oakland Community College right now and several other community colleges have programs, certificate programs that do not require a four-year college degree to be trained for this growing industry. And Kane County can become a leader in developing cannabis-related products. In my studies and research, I know we're all concerned about drug addiction, and wisely so. But some of the cannabis products now have no THC, meaning there's no hallucinogenic, and they're meant mainly for health-related products. And these are things that we could certainly research and develop with the training and the help of our junior colleges. So with that consideration, I think we should give full thought to this and see if this would be appropriate for Kane County to go further forward on. Thank you.
Let me make a suggestion here, and I'm trying to read the crowd as I say this, but I'm going to guess that we have some votes that will be no matter what we do to try to deal with this, and some people who have asked questions about what the content of the eventual ordinance will be. And it would, it seems to make sense to me that we consider, to Mr. Ford's suggestion, delaying this for 30 days to look at an ordinance that might, or recommendations from staff that might in fact put some meat on the bones of what it is we're considering. It addresses Mr. Shepro's concerns about creating a void. It gives people who would otherwise consider it, if they knew more about the eventual process, to make a more valid decision, and seems to avoid the trick bag of moving in either direction full-fledged. So if in fact somebody shares that thought with me, if they want to move to table it for 30 days, I don't know if that would be sufficient for staff, Mark. If that was done, is 30 days sufficient, or would you want more time? Because we're going to have to do this, even if we approve it today, we're still going to have to review changes.
That's sufficient. We had actually drafted back in 2019 an alternative if the county would have allowed it at that time. That never went through the process to the zoning board of appeals for their review. But we can start with that draft and do some work to update it and have it on the for the agenda for next month, along with this ordinance.
Mr. Chairman, Kenyon would move to table.
Brown will second.
Bates, please. Bates, please.
Table, Ms. Bates.
I would like to add that if we are going to consider allowing growers in King County, that the growing season is coming up pretty soon, within weeks, or certainly within weeks. Would tabling for 30 days make it so that they lose a year of possible growing? Thank you.
Well, let me volunteer here. First off, there is no debate on a motion to table, but to address the issue, all these grows are done in buildings. They don't grow this stuff in fields. So the seasonal aspect of it is not going to impact we're not going to impact any seasonal activity. So we have a motion to table in front of us, moved and seconded. Would the clerk please call the roll?
May I just ask who the second was on that?
Brown.
Brown, thank you. Berman?
No.
Brown?
Yes.
Ford?
Yes.
Igbal?
No.
Kenyon?
Yes.
Wonicky?
Yes.
4 to 2 yeses.
Motion carries. The matter stands tabled. The next item on our agenda is planning and special projects.
Thank you. As I've noted last month, our planning and special projects division reports to and supports the work of a variety of committees. This report kind of summarizes that. We have it organized by committee, and in the interest of time, I will just answer any questions that you may have and ask that it be placed on file at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Are there any questions of Mr. Van Kerkhoff? Hearing none, thank you for your, I'm reading this text here. Okay. Subdivisions. May we proceed? Morningstar Community Church.
It appears that Deanne is muted. Blair, can you assist her?
She has to unmute herself. It'd be *6 to unmute. I can only request.
Deanne, are you able to get unmuted?
Can you hear me
*6.
now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Morningstar Community Church. This is a subdivision that is coming before you. It's an existing church and a residence on the site. It is down in the southern portion of our county in Sugar Grove Township. They propose to have 2 lots. They've already been through the zoning process in which the underlying E1 zoning is still in place for the church, and they have changed the residential portion to reflect an E3. Thank you for advancing that slide. As you can see, the parcel is just west of Orchard Road along Prairie Street. If I can have the next slide, please. And there's a close-up aerial photo of the area. Directly to the west of this parcel is incorporated into the city of Aurora. The east portion of this parcel is forest preserve, which incorporates Blackberry Creek. As you can see, there is some floodplain that's on this parcel, and with this subdivision, they have taken into account to make sure that the detention and stormwater issues that are on the site are in appropriate easements. May I have the next slide? And as you can see, this is the actual subdivision that has been presented to us for request for approval. It creates the 2 lots with the necessary detention, and it is being created so that the church can sell off that residential portion. Next slide, please. Staff recommends that this subdivision be approved. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. May we have a motion, please?
Board motion.
Mr. Ford moved. Mr. Berman seconds. Are there any comments or questions? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
I just wanted to confirm Mr. Ford and Mr. Berman.
Correct.
Thank you. Berman,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon, Warnicki.
Warnicki, yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Our 2020 fiscal year land cash report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you may recall, it was almost a year ago that we presented to you that we wanted to revise the land cash ordinance, which was located within the subdivision ordinance as Article 5. By redoing the ordinance and pulling it out of the subdivision ordinance, it's a standalone ordinance, which enables us to use the ordinance not only on parcels that are within a subdivision, but parcels that may be developed as residential outside of a subdivision. Now that we've had several months of this ordinance being in place, I just wanted to report to you that it has been working well. Our accounts in which we were holding money for other schools and parks, they've all been closed out, which means the county is no longer watching other folks' money. And we've been able to get good feedback from schools and parks in reference to them acquiring their funds in a prompt manner. So they've been very appreciative of that. I would request that the committee remain on tasks or on available to us in the event that we have any kind of discrepancies. It would be the committee that would need to resolve those issues. Can I answer any questions?
Well, I want to comment and thank you for, I know that this was one heck of an effort to get this done, and very pleased that it's functioning as you anticipated it. I don't think there was any real doubt that it wouldn't work, but again, I want to thank you very much for your efforts in making this situation right and putting us together a good, solid ordinance. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
The next matter on the agenda is environmental resources.
We only have one item today under water resources. If you'd like me to present that one.
Please do.
This is the ordinance establishing the Church Molitor Special Service Area. This came before the committee proposing the Church Molitor SSA previously last year. Unfortunately, the public hearing was delayed by the COVID virus. And so that was held this fall. It was sent to all the owners within the SSA as well as published in the newspaper. And we had received after 90 days, no objections at the county clerk's office. So this will finalize, once it goes to county board, this will finalize that special service area. And we are looking for potentially a fall construction for this project. So I would recommend approval of the establishing ordinance for the Church Molitor Special Service Area.
Berman
Thank you.
moves
We
for
have
approval.
Mr. Berman moves. May we have a second, please?
Brown will second.
I'm sorry, who was it? Oh, Brown. And Brown
Brown,
seconds.
yep.
Do we have comments or questions? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Brown, yes.
Fries,
Yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon, Woniki.
Woniki, yes.
Thank you.
You could skip Ford. Ford, yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ford.
That's
Ford,
okay. Ford,
Thank you.
yes.
thank you.
Thank you. Motion carries. Relative to item 10 and the resolution proposed by Mr. Mr. Berger had an unavoidable conflict with a meeting to attend at 10:30 today. And both he and I intended to move his presentation to the beginning of this meeting, but the meeting didn't start until 10:30. So I'm going to make the presentation on behalf of Scott. This is this resolution before you, authorizing the renewal of contract for continuum of care support for 21 is the exercise of a final renewal right of a contract for federal fund. The money for this comes from federal funding. There is no increase in the charge, and the consulting firm with whom we contract is our access or assistant to almost $2 million worth of federal funding. So if I could have a motion, please, to approve this.
Motion to approve, Berman.
Ford,
Mr.
second.
Berman moves, Mr. Ford seconds. Do we have any comments or questions? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Brown, yes.
Ford,
Ford, yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon, Woniki.
Woniki, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion carries. We have no Sellers Hill report today. Does anyone on the committee have any new business to bring before the group? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to place the reports on file?
Brown moves.
Woniki moves.
Mr.
Woniki
Brown
seconds.
moves. Ms. Wanicki seconds. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Brown, yes.
Ford, Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon, Woniki.
Woniki, yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. The reports on file. I have no knowledge of any needed executive sessions, so I would ask a motion and a second to adjourn.
Ford moves.
Mr. Ford moves, Mr. Brown seconds. All in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Meeting stands adjourned.